What I'm going to talk about, just like John said, it's hard to kind of get a lot of our details in 20, 25-minute presentations, and I do a lot of these talks where we can take all day to drill down to the specifics. So I'm just going to kind of really do a basic kind of gloss over the topic of herbicides, how we use them in forestry, why we use them in forestry, and talk a little bit at the end about the economics of it. So kind of just to jump right in there, let me see which way I got to point this thing. Okay. So when we talk about utilizing herbicides in forestry, it's a lot different than utilizing in the crop world. For instance, in corn and soybeans, you're looking at 2 and 3 applications a year. And in forestry, this is the most that you would ever see herbicides used. Predominantly, it's at site preparation. It's after the harvest. It's after the clear cut, where you'll have a delay in your site and come in and spray. Possibly you'll do a herbaceous weed control the following year, which is to control the grasses and the broadleaf weeds. If you did not spray and you cut, you would come in and do a woody release like age 2, 3, 4, 5. Later on in life, if you've maybe done a site prep, maybe not, if you've had a couple thins, you'd come in and do a mid-rotation release right over the top of the trees. The least utilized is a pre-harvest treatment, and that's used for tax purposes sometimes, where you come in and spray it right before you cut it. So in the most that you would really see in our forest life cycle that we're dealing with on loblolly, longleaf, and slash, this is all the times that we'll use herbicides in forestry. So it's a really nice, clean package, and it's a lot different than utilization in the crop world. So that's something important for folks to realize and how we use herbicides. The reason that we do it, and I think you've heard it from some of the other speakers today, is it's to eliminate the competition around the hardwood, around the pine tree that we're trying to grow. So it's a real easy graph. The closer that you get to growing your pine, you have the least number of stems of hardwood on a per acre basis. The more stems you get, the smaller your basal areas to grow. And I promise this is probably the last graph in my presentation. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to eliminate the competition. In this slide, this is a hardwood stem, and all the roots that are painted in white are coming off the single hardwood stem. This is our crop. This is our pine crop, and all the roots are painted in red. So you can see the competition that you're getting underground. You may not visually see it above ground when you go out and look at your site, but you got to always consider what's happening underground. And I know there's a lot of different things going on in our markets with wanting to grow hardwood and wanting them on your site. So just so everybody here knows, this is based on pine production, this presentation. There's a lot of times I'll come out to a site and it will look like this. And it was a site that was cut and probably walked away from for a couple years, and they want to regenerate it. So what we're effectively trying to do with the utilization of herbicides is move your site from this to this. And I know this is not necessarily realistic expectation on every track, but what that has done from here to here is it's given superior planter access for the planters to go in and plant it, and you'd be surprised how that site will revegetate itself with vegetation the following year. So it's only going to stay in this state for a very short time during this. A couple years ago, I was asked to come out to this site. Rich is about 6'1", 6'2", and I was asked to spray that site. And we wanted to go back into Longleaf. So mechanical equipment was not an option on this site. And when we went out and looked at it, it's kind of one of those, okay, well, we're going to do the best we can possibly do. I went out and took this picture at the beginning of this week. This is that same site, planted in Longleaf, and that's 2 years later. We sprayed it, it was burned, and planted in Longleaf. So you can do a lot with herbicides. You can't necessarily do everything with them all the time. There's a lot of reasons to utilize mechanical equipment on this site. You come in with it ahead of time and then spray. So it's not the catch-all, it's just another tool in the toolbox to help you get you where you want to be with your site. This is a site that was not burned. This was really heavy to pine competition, and I was asked to go out and treat this. What you're looking at there is this has been sprayed. It has not been burned. And you can see the background back here, what it would look like if you had not sprayed that site in terms of the green vegetation. And then they went back in and planted this. So sometimes we use burns, which is very good to, again, give planter access and knock your vegetation down. And sometimes we don't burn. It just depends on the circumstances that you're dealing with. behind the herbicide. So that's, in utilizing site prep, there's a lot of different things you can do. There's several different herbicides you can put in the tank to achieve the results you want to achieve in terms of controlling competition. And there's a few other things that we can do with that as well. Sometimes you get a site where the pilot left off this corner, and what I like to call that area, yes, it's not completely clean, but you have a control area. You know what has been sprayed, what was left off, the line was hit here, and you can look at that and see the type of competition that would be out on that site if you had not sprayed it. So sometimes it's not a bad thing if you accidentally leave off a little area, so you can see yourself what the site would be like if you didn't have it sprayed all the way line to line. After site prep, we look at what's called herbaceous weed control, when you're trying to control your weedy competition after you've planted your pine trees. This particular site is a pasture. This was sprayed in the fall of last year, and it was planted this winter. I took this picture 2 weeks ago. And what you're looking at here is we did a site prep, and we also put herbaceous weed control in the tank at the same time as the site prep. And I don't want to confuse anyone. They're two separate practices. You do site prep, and then you do herbaceous weed control. But we have the ability now to put the herbaceous weed control in the tank in the fall of the year before you plant to get what we call carryover. You're getting carryover in that soil in order to control the vegetation out here so these longleaf can thrive. So we did site prep, we did herbaceous weed control on the same site. This is looking from the other way. This was run by cattle at some point, so not only did they spray it, but then they also came in and ripped the site to put the Longleaf Fence. So major advantages to using herbicides to put that herbaceous weed control in the tank ahead of time. It does cost a little bit more, but then you're not going back and doing the treatment the following year. So it's just a matter of assessing your site and kind of knowing what your objectives are of what you want to do, kind of what you want to plant, and how to get there. Another regime that we talked about utilizing herbicides is mid-rotation release. And this is a really neat part of using herbicides. It's where you have mature timber and you have a lot of understory underneath. And what you're wanting to do is to capture that understory. Like John had talked about, fire is used a lot to do this. And you mentioned sometimes if you've run the fire through it and the sweet gums get too high to continue to burn, then you'll switch over to using herbicides followed with the burn. So in order to turn that site, fire is very important behind herbicides to get that knocked down, to get it, to get that flush of broadleaf weeds, all the different type of wildlife habitat that's going to come out to come back into the site and capture it. And that's what we're going for. Now this particular site, I was enjoying John's, his presentation, because one of the reasons that I wrote out there, on this site we were wanting to see what it looked like. This was just burned, I think it was a month and a half ago. What we got on this site, they got way high in the trees, way high in the trees. So there was some concern over how hot that burn got, but what was amazing, there wasn't a whole lot of vegetation real high. So I was learning a lot from what you were saying because the vegetation wasn't high, but the conditions turned and changed. But I think overall we'll end up being okay on this site. If this is the same site, this is what was sprayed and burned, and this is your treated side of that track. So this is just a whole different timing of when you use herbicides on a site. To talk about the economies of this, I did a study years ago with Midwest Vaco over in Georgia because we wanted to look at mid-rotation release and what kind of return on investment that you would get out of it. And we did different amounts of herbicide in there. And in general, their study, again, this was Midwest Vaco's study, came back at 1/2 cord per acre per year of additional growth behind mid-rotation. And it's sometimes a missed opportunity for landowners because you may or may not know this is an option for you. And it is very species dependent. If you have loblolly, you can do different things with loblolly than you can with longleaf or slash. So depending on what trees you have and how old they are and what you've done underneath to capture that understory, this is just something that's not really readily known. Site prep is very well known because you cut it and perhaps the money's been held back for you to site prep, or you just know we need to site prep it in order to put the trees in the ground. But a lot of people don't know that this is a really very, it's an underutilized tool that we have in forestry. There's just, once you've done it and done it on your property and see the results you get, it's just amazing. And just like John's talk, you've captured this left side, you can continue to put fire through that and safe fire versus something that's this tall where you're gonna have to utilize herbicides to get it down to start those fire regimes. And something I do like to talk about like this, because I like to, this is probably one of my least utilized treatments that I do. So many different aspects of this that folks don't realize. So Tara in Louisiana did lots of their property this way. They did these treatments. They increased their hunting leases to their hunting clubs. You can go up significantly because you've created better habitat to hunt in. Also, if there's anybody in this room that cruises timber, they will tell you, Mr. John and them were telling us that outside, they'd much rather be on this side than that side. So there are economies of scales to these treatments that are well worth it, that are just beyond, we got it down so we can see all the way through the track. So there's several different benefits there, and then the wildlife material that actually comes back into this site, it's just amazing. You get all your dewberry, blackberry, American beautyberry, all your vines, bunch grasses, and over the last couple weeks I've met with several landowners that they want to do these treatments because they want that quail-like effect. And so then it's always the conversation of what's your DBH, where do we need to get it to? Let's start this 5 to 10 year process to get there. And this is one of the steps that's involved in that process to kind of get that quail-like plantation. But it's just amazing. A lot of people don't realize that this is an available tool to them. So again, just to kind of repeat that process, you have your vegetation that's way too high, it'd be way too hot to burn it. You spray it, you get it down, you introduce the fire into the stand, and voila. And it's really that easy. I've got a lot of landowners here that have done that, and they are just thrilled with what has happened on their property. And I will say this, Mother Nature, she's very strong, and nothing's 100%, and you will get some hardwoods that come back into that site, especially along SMZs. If you've left oaks out, anywhere you've buffered off of, you'll continue to get the seed in from the surrounding trees. But overall on your site, you will completely change your site with applications like this. I had mentioned a couple different things about applications, the different ways things are done. Helicopter, skidder, tractor, four-wheeler, backpack. Every site is different. Every site needs to be looked at to have a determination made of how to spray and then what to spray. It's not a cookbook, just turn to the page, this is what we do. It is very specific because what I like to tell people is once it goes out the boom, it can't go back into the boom. And it was amazing. I was out looking at some tracks that right after Easter that were just loaded with dogwood, and I was riding with the person, and I'm like, this is going to be really nice. So like, you're going to kill my dogwood. I'm going to wipe them out. So I've learned a valuable lesson: never look at a track right after Easter. So, okay, just to kind of touch on this, because like I said, I'm trying to just do an overall brief, kind of capture on herbicides and how that you can use them, and they're good for your land. It's a good investment. I'm always told that I'm the poison lady. I'm going to come out and poison something. We're really not poisoning anything. When you look at the toxicity of products, the higher the number, the more you have to have it in your body in order to kill you. And if you look at the oral LD50 of table sugar, 29,000. Now let's drop down here to aspirin, caffeine, and nicotine. I'm not a nicotine user, but I hit that sweet tea on a regular basis. Plenty of caffeine in that. And what do they say? Bare aspirin 1 a day keeps the doctor away. So the moral of the story is the way that plants utilize herbicides, they work on amino acids and they work on the photosynthetic process of plants that we don't do. We don't photosynthesize. We don't have those amino acids in our body. For the and I'm doing kind of an overall, the majority of herbicides, if you get them into your body, if they're ingested, if they're on your skin, if you inhale them, however you get them in your body, we excrete them out of us. That's why they don't necessarily harm us. But this is an overall. There are plenty of herbicides with danger labels that if you ingest it, that it will kill you. But the majority that we use here in forestry, we have a very safe package of them. And it's kind of like John said, it's, you got to be careful with what you do, how you utilize these tools, but overall, they are very safe.
Do you have any LD50 studies on table salts? I noticed one on the table.
There is probably one on table salt, but I think it's been in the graphs before. I just didn't have it on there. Yes, sir. Yeah, I kind of drilled down to those, but I think there is one with table salt. Yes, sir. Just to kind of touch on some of them that we use that you may recognize the name of, Roundup. It's the biggest globally utilized herbicide in the world. We use that in forestry. We use Milestone, Arsenal, Escort, Garlon, Oust. That's just a handful of them. And to talk about how they work, they may work just by touching the leaf of the plant, the foliar part. Some of them are just soil active. Some of them are just foliar active. And then it talks right here how they work. Inhibits synthesis of amino acids, growth regulator. And then we talk about the half-life of them, how long they're persistent in the soil, because that's very important if you're trying to do different things with your property and rotate different things in. So these are just some of the commonly ones used. And I got just a couple more slides for you. You can't use that 5-minute thing.
You're doing
good. Okay. These slides are older. They're from the University of Georgia from Barry Shiver's studies. But what this is a very general, the economies of scales when using herbicides versus mechanical. And like I said earlier, there are sites that you need to use herbicide plus mechanical. It may just be mechanical only. It may be herbicide only. That's why we look at all of them. We look at each site to tell you, to advise you, this is what needs to be done on the site. And in this, what Dr. Shivers used here, he was just looking at what does it cost, what's the difference here? Because a lot of people think herbicides are expensive. And again, these are 2001 figures. Oops, let me go back. So you're looking at the cost on mechanical site prep of 100, planting of 70. Again, these are old numbers. So that's what you have at stay in establishment. And then they compared that to 3 different uses of herbicide. We did site prep, we did herbaceous, and we did mid-rotation, and our planting was the same. And what Dr. Shivers came up with over there was he came out with his growth and yield model, how much that you would get with your thinning and harvest, what your reforestation costs are, what your taxes are, and what your net income is. And you look at your reforestation cost here at $32,000 versus $17,000, but you have a higher net income. And the reason that you have a higher net income, everything's staying the same. Again, this is all plugged into a growth and yield model from the University of Georgia. What you've done is you've effectively eliminated your hardwood competition on your site. You have changed your classification of timber that has come off the site. You doubled your pulpwood, you almost tripled your chip and saw, and then almost doubled your saw timber. And it's based on the same amount of time. Again, this is a growth and yield model. This is generated on a computer. It's not necessarily real life. There's so many different things that can change out there with your site, but when Dr. Shivers at the University of Georgia worked on it, they were trying to study the economies of scale of utilizing herbicides to maximize what you could do on a site. Because that was back in the day when we had a lot of people that, for instance, Union Camp used to keep their tracks just completely weed-free for years on end, and there needed to be some information of kind of what's your tipping point, how far can you go. So there is a return on investment from herbicides, and it's all about eliminating the competition. It's about growing your crop as fast as you possibly can and that you want to. But the downside of it, and Mr. John and them talked about it outside, the difference between juvenile wood, how do you say it, Mr. John? Juvenile wood and there you go, styrofoam wood. So there's differences there, and that's what I want to impress upon everyone. Every site is different. It needs to be looked at. Your objectives need to be discussed in order for you to determine what you want to do with your site and how best herbicides can accommodate you. And this was on a trip with Mr. John, and he saved me from the snake.